we're going to talk about authentication. And this is going to be the first time we interact with the database as well. So we don't just want anyone using our API. Like, yes, cores is cool because it doesn't, the thing about cores is that like it allows you to prevent different IP addresses or different requests that have specific headers or different type of methods from interacting, but it doesn't tell you who the person is, what role they might have, if their account is in good standing. Like, it doesn't tell you that. It's just saying if this request is even able to make a request. That's what CORS is. It's typically called a pre-flight check. It's like the browser sends off an API call to your server ahead of time. Let's say you want to make a post request to Stripe's API. The browser will go to Stripe's API first and be like, is this client allowed to even talk to you, Stripe? And then Stripe will respond back with a CORS option saying like, these are the things that I allow. And if the browser says like, oh yeah, this client fits that, then the browser will send off your request. So it actually makes 2 requests when it does that in the browser. Okay, that isn't the same as authentication. Authentication is like, okay, now that your request actually got accepted and you can go forward, who are you again? Like, that's authentication. Who are you? Are you allowed? What are you allowed to do? What is your information? What is your ID? So we want to add authentication because our database is multi-tenant. What does multi-tenant mean? It just means it's the data like we don't have one database for every user. Like there's one database and it's got every user is on that database and every user's information is on that database. So we have to be very careful that we don't let some users see some other user's data. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that user 1 only sees user 1's data and not user 2's data? Because they're in the same database. So it's like, well, we needed a way to identify what user is making the API call so we can scope all their queries and writes to the user. How do we do that? Well, that's where authentication comes in. We can now identify and authenticate someone based off something. So the approach that we're going to do, it's called a JWT, or JSON Web Token, or some people pronounce it JOT. I'm never going to say that. I refuse to call it a JOT. It's a JWT, or it's a JSON Web Token in my book. But if you want to call it JOT, you can call it that. What is a JSON Web Token? Well, you don't need to be a crypto expert, and I'm not talking blockchain crypto, I'm talking like cryptography. You don't need to be a cryptologist to understand a JSON Web Token. It's basically TLDR, take a JavaScript object, whatever you want on it, and that JavaScript object, given a secret, which is a string, can deterministically be converted to some random string. And that string can be converted back to the same object given the same secret. It's almost like hashing, but not quite. I'm not a scientist, so don't quote me on it. But I can deterministically always get the same result to and from that string and that object if I use the same secret. And that's what a JSON Web Token is. The reason we do that is because we don't have to store anything on the server. The alternative would be something like a session where you have to keep track of who's logged in your API right now, which just eats up resources. And then you got to do session management, and I don't want to do it. JSON Web Token, the client stores the token on their own, client, and then they just got to send it with every single request because the server is just going to check it every single request. It's like, yeah, we got to check, if you are the same person every time, and that's annoying, but it's better than storing whether or not you're logged in or not. So it's a trade-off. We'll be using JSON Web Tokens. So let's create some JSON Web Tokens. First, we need to download some things. So we're going to npm install all of these goodies. So npm install, let me go here and do this here. npm install JSON Web Tokens, all lowercase, plural, bcrypt and .env. If bcrypt doesn't install on your computer, because sometimes it doesn't, why did mine just break? Oh, I think it's JSON Web Token. Sorry, not tokens. If bcrypt doesn't install on your computer, for some reason, there's issues with older Intels or newer M1s. There's sometimes there's issues. If that doesn't work, there's an alternative that has the same API that usually works. Let me know. We can find it. But yeah, install those. JSON Web Token, singular, bcrypt, and .env. Then we're going to create a new file, a new folder and a file. We're going to create a new folder called modules, and we're going to make a new file in there called auth. So I'm going to go inside of source, make a new folder. We'll call it modules. Inside of modules, I'm going to make a new file called auth.ts. So this is just kind of my approach. I typically create like a utils folder or I don't know, always give it some random name. I've been using utils for a while. I recently switched over to modules because I like the icon. So yeah, they're called modules now. So, there you go. But yeah, I like to put my auth stuff in one file versus like having it sprinkled all across the app because they typically rely on each other. Like all auth things rely on each other anyway, so I'll put them in one file. Even though they're like, functionally, they do different things. One might be a middleware, one might be a handler, one might be some utility function, but they're all auth, so I'll put them in one file. That might not be your flow. You might want to put all middleware in one file, all handlers in one file, all whatever in one file. I don't like to box myself into one thing. I just do what feels right. And from my experience, I hate having 10 files open to deal with auth changes. I just rather have one file open. And it's usually auth that has all those changes all the time. Like, oh, for Jacob's computer, make sure you turn off the auth. And I'm like, okay. Then it's like, I just want this in one file. Like, I don't feel like doing all this. Okay, so we're gonna do this stuff in one file. So a couple things we're gonna do is first, we're gonna create a function to create a JSON web token. So let's do just that. In auth.js, we're gonna import JSON, I'm gonna call it JWT from JSON web token. Then I'm gonna export const create JWT. And remember, JWT is basically converting an object to a string. So we need an object. We want this object to have something, we want this object to be something that is unique about a user. So when we undo the string and turn it back to an object, out comes that unique thing about the user that we can use to identify a user. So what is something unique about a user that we can use to identify a user? ID, yeah, it'll be an ID. And also any other unique thing on the user, which will be a username. So I'm gonna put a username and an ID in the JSON web token. So later on when I get back the user, when someone's trying to access the API, I can be like, who are you? Oh, you're a user ID, whatever. You're a user with the username, whatever. So I need to put whatever I want on, whatever I put on the token needs to be useful for me identifying them later. Sometimes if you had like, role-based access, RBAC or something, you would put the role of the user in the JSON web token too, so you can quickly check to see if they have the right role to do something, right? We don't have that, so we're not doing that. But typically you want to keep the JWT light. The more that's on the payload, the longer the string gets. So try to keep it light. Cool, create JWT. It's gonna take in a user. And then we're gonna say JWT, or we're gonna say token equals JWT.sign, like that. It's gonna take two arguments. It's gonna take an object, so the payload, in this case, an ID with a user.id, and then a username with a user.username, like that. And then the second argument is a secret. You cannot sign or verify JWT without having that sprinkled in secret. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our env file. Under our database, we're gonna make JWT secret. And you can put whatever string you want, doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you want. I'm gonna put cookies. I ate a bunch of cookies last night. I ordered some insomnia cookies. They came late, and then they sent me another one. So I had 12 cookies, and I ate them all. So I'm not ashamed. I'm gonna put cookies. By default, anything in the environment variable file does not get loaded up into our environment. We have to load it up whenever our server starts. The only reason Prisma was able to get it because somewhere in their code, they're doing just that. They're looking in this file and they're grabbing the database URL. But JWT secret will not be loaded up into our code. We have to do that. That's why we installed .env. So if we go into index, it's gonna look like this. So we can just import .env star, so everything as .env from .env. And then .env.config. This is what looks at the .env file, gets every single environment variable in there, loads them up into your environment, and now you can access them on process.env. And the reason we're doing this in the index file because this is the entry point to our server. So we want these envs to be loaded up immediately so the rest of the app can actually use them. So you want to do it in the entry file to your server, which in our case is index.ts. You don't want to load this up on like some handler file somewhere. because if anything else that got loaded before the handler file executed needed the .env, it would never have it. It would say that doesn't exist. And you're like, yeah, it is. It's there. Because I logged in my handler file and I did see it. Well, yeah, because that loaded after the .env file. So just put this in the entry file. Okay, so we got that. Now we should be able to say our secret is going to be process.env.jwt secret, like so. There we go. Let me fix this. I don't know why my prettier not working. It's all good. Cool. So this is going to give us back a string. Token is now a string. And then we could just return that token like that. Yes, question.
Which is preferable for storing JWT tokens, local storage or secure HTTPS server, only cookies?
The preferred method for storing a JWT on a client side for a browser, you know, I've tried like many different places. What I've landed on eventually was just storing it in a cookie. We're not going to be storing it in a cookie here, but because you need like interaction from the front end and whatnot. But I think storing it on a cookie is ideal because cookies are automatically sent up. So it just saves you time on the front end. Because I mean, I guess you only have to write the code once on the front end, but I guess it gets kind of tedious, like having to grab local storage every single time you want to make a request to grab your JSON web token and attach it to the header, or like come up with some interceptor on the front end that does it for you automatically. Whereas if it was just a cookie, all cookies get sent automatically to the server, so then the server will just check for cookies. But on the server side, I actually prefer the token to be on the authorization header. I think that's more appropriate, and it makes more sense. So although from a client perspective, I like having it in the cookie because I don't have to write it. From a server perspective, I prefer to have it in the header. So I guess it depends on what side of the project I'm working on. But today, we're on the server side, so it's going in the authorization header, which means it'll probably be in local storage.